Well, it's Father's Day, so let's just do this. Ephesians 6, starting at verse 1, we read this. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Amen. Ha I knew that one was coming. I could say, notice there's no age requirement on that, but let's just move right on to verse 2. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. That is not the passage I'm going to be preaching out of today. It's Father's Day, and a lot of times what happens on Father's Day is churches will have very specific sermons for dads, and on Mother's Day, very specific sermons for moms. It's been pointed out a lot of times over the years to me that people, as they've experienced church throughout the decades, it tends to go like this. Mother's Day is a great sermon, uplifting moms, encouraging moms, saying how great moms are, and then you get to Father's Day, and it's like, all right, time to whip the dads, right? Get into shape. We're not going to do that. This has been my method of ministry on those days. If I have a Father's Day or Mother's Day sermon that I'm feeling inspired to give, then I give it, but I don't do it just for the sake of doing it. And a lot of years, we just continue right on rolling with whatever book of the Bible we're preaching through. So today we are going to be in Genesis 25, but you're going to notice from this passage pretty much through the end of the book of Genesis, a little bit of shifting taking place in the way I'm preaching. And I just want to explain this to you. One, we don't have our Wednesday night services going on throughout the summer, which means I have to preach these passages a little bit differently. Earlier this year, as we were going through Genesis, if you noticed, I was taking small sections on Sunday morning most of the time, and Wednesday night we would take much bigger sections and be able to dig in deeper, so I was moving quicker. As we are getting to just this last third, in a way, it's not an actual third numerically, but third when it comes to stories, the last third of Genesis, there are some really long stories here, and so a lot of these sermons are going to be running commentaries. But here's the other thing. Pastors tend to have their shtick, the way that they preach, the way that they view the Bible, and we tend to have different topics we gravitate towards. One of the reasons I do preach through the Bible, verse by verse, and take different books of the Bible, is it forces me to preach on topics that I naturally wouldn't drift towards. You might notice that some pastors, just about every sermon you hear ends up dealing with end times prophecy. Or other pastors, almost every sermon ends up talking about, heaven. Some pastors, every sermon ends up on the topic of hell. And other pastors, just about every sermon ends up on money somehow. But you look at it, I think a lot of my sermons naturally start drifting towards the gospel. I love talking about grace. I love talking about Christ. And I just get so excited about that. One area of my preaching that hasn't been as big, or hasn't been as big of an emphasis is what I should say, is the topic of families. Why? Well, we can look back just the last few years, if you've been coming for the last 3 years. We preached through Revelation. A lot there on families? Not really. Not really. We spent time going through the Gospel of John. A lot there about families? Not really. Not really. This last fall, we went through Colossians, an epistle. Anything there about families? Yeah. Yeah, we actually had one Sunday on husbands and wives and one on parents and children and stuff, but we did that because that's where the text was. But as we're moving into this new section of Genesis, more and more, Genesis is going to focus on the topic of families. And I'm really excited about this because we're just going to have a conversation about families over and over and over again. We'll try to weave in other verses in the Bible. We'll talk about just wisdom, just having raised kids myself, having talked with you all, and looking at great parenting that's in our congregation. But I think there's a lot here that is going to be incredibly beneficial to us. Whether you are actively living in a family situation or not, because the reality is all of us have a family. All of us have a family. And it might be the family that you were born into. It might be the family that was chosen for you, or it might be the family that you chose. But all of us live within those type of relationships. So today, as we're going to look through Genesis 25, starting at verse 19, we're going to work our way through it. We're just going to have a conversation about the family. This is what you read in verse 19. These are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham fathered Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Paddan Aram, the sister of Laban, the Aramean, to be his wife. You might be looking at this and thinking, didn't you just read this and go over this last week? Yeah, I did. But we're going to mine it for other good elements of gold that we didn't talk about last week. Verse 21, Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren. And the Lord granted his prayer, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. The children struggled together within her, and she said, "If it is thus, why is this happening to me?" And so she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. The older shall serve the younger. And when her days to give birth were completed, behold, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy cloak. So they called his name Esau. Afterward, his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man, dwelling in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. I think it's important to recognize how this family started out. A couple weeks ago, we went through an entire chapter in one Sunday and looked at the wedding of Isaac and Rebekah. And if you remember that story, Abraham, Isaac's father, says to his servant, "I want you to go to the land I am from, and I want you to find a wife for my son." When you look at the story, it's just this beautiful picture of a father wanting to prepare a bride for the son. And we looked at it in very clear terms of what it represents with Christ and the church. But don't miss the very practical aspect of this. This couple who's starting this family came together through prayer. Came together through prayer. It was the servant who was given a command to go, but if you notice in that story along the way, the servant is constantly praying, "Lord, who is it that's supposed to be the bride for Isaac? I want to be successful on this. I want my master Abraham to be blessed. I want Isaac to be blessed. Lord, would you guide my steps? Would you lead me to just the right person?" This family starts out with prayer. And that's an incredible thing. I get asked sometimes, is there one right person for me to marry? You want to know who the right person is for you to marry? The one you married. All right, the one you married. I can't tell you for certain from Scripture that in every single case, God has exactly one person for one other person to be married. Do we see stories in the Bible that look that way and there's this beautiful union happening and God directs them to each other? Yeah, there are definitely those stories. Are there other stories in the Bible where we don't see that at all? It's just simply somebody's saying, wow, and somebody else saying, ooh, and then they get together. Absolutely. Absolutely. Does God direct some people to a specific person? Yes. Does God do that for everybody? I'm not personally convinced. I'm not personally convinced that is the case. And you see God operating that way over and over again in the Bible, and just as you learn to walk with the Lord. Sometimes the Lord will tell certain people very specific things of what they're supposed to do. If you're told by God something very specific, do this, the wisest course of action is just to obey. But if you're praying and the Lord doesn't give you an answer, then the wisest course of action is to step out in wisdom and faith and trust the Lord. You look at this, in this particular story, it was just this beautiful union that God brought together, and it happened through prayer. As we got into the text today, we're fast forwarding another 20 years. We know that this couple started out through prayer. 20 years later, Rebekah hasn't had a child. And so what's the next scene? Isaac prays to God. Isaac prays to God. We don't know what happened in that 20-year time span, but it would seem that if they're starting out with prayer and 20 years later there's prayer, that most likely in that interim gap, guess what was there? Prayer. Prayer. Moms and dads, pray for your families. Children, whether you're teens or you're adults, pray for your family. Prayer is the best thing you can give to your children. The absolute best thing. I tell a lot of parents, especially dads, as I meet with them and they're talking about raising kids or they have adult children and we're discussing how to deal with adult children. I always say there's a few good phrases to learn that will just help out your family so much, whether your kids are young or whether your kids are adult. Several phrases that you need to learn. I love you. That's a really good phrase to learn, right? Look at your kids and tell them you love them. Don't say to yourself, well, they know. No, they need it verbalized. They need it verbalized. They need to hear those words from you. Dad, I love you. Another great phrase, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you. You might be very proud of them. But once again, guess what? All of us need to have that vocalized from our parents or from other people. Here's the thing. You would not believe how many times I have people coming to me and they tell me, I never heard the words, I love you. Or my father passed away, and I don't know if he was proud of me. He never said it. And how many times adults have dysfunctions in their life because those things were never intentionally vocalized. Even though it's Father's Day, this applies to dads and moms. And even though it's Father's Day and the gifts are supposed to go to the dads, give those gifts to your kids today. Vocalize those things. Other phrases that are really great to be able to just give to your kids. Phrases like, how are you doing? You want to hang out. But you know what the best one is? How can I pray for you? How can I pray for you? When was the last time you looked at one of your kids? Or if they're out of state or somewhere else, maybe midday you just sent a text and said, how can I pray for you right now? Let me know. I'll stop and pray. That is one of the best things you can give to your family. How can you pray for them? Do you know how to pray? You look at this, and I love the fact that what we see in the start of this family as we look at Jacob and Esau and their birth, the parents, Isaac and Rebekah, and then even as we go down further with the next generation after that, is there is going to be a spirituality that takes place. These people worship God, they walk with God, and their prayers and attention are directed towards God. Families, pray together, pray for each other. Now look at this. This is the way I'm presenting this, and it's the way it's presented in the text. It starts out with prayer, and then there's a prophecy, right? Isn't that awesome? They pray, and God actually speaks. That's cool. But you look at it, and you find out right away, God's very open and honest with them. You're praying, kind of going to have a messed up family. You're kind of going to have a messed up family. I mean, right off the bat, and the Lord granted his prayer, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. The children struggled within her. That phrase in Hebrew means that one was trying to crush the other one, all right? We tame it down. They struggled. No, it means one's trying to crush the other one, all right? If any parents in here ever broken up a sibling argument that was actually not an argument, it was one trying to crush the other one? Yeah, you guys can be honest. Yeah, that just happens. I remember once, and my parents don't know about this, but my older brother and I getting in a physical fight over pie, and it ended with him standing on my head, right? My oldest daughter just said, that explains a lot. It's a tumor, okay? Yeah, you look at it, and it's just one of those things where this kind of stuff happens. But here, Rebekah's like, I'm finally going to have kids. Oh, wow, the Lord blesses me. I have twins. And then she finds out, wait a second. This fighting that's going on inside of me is going to be their entire life. I'm going to have two sons, and all the days of their life, they're just going to fight. In fact, it's going to end up where out of the two of them, there's two whole nations that are going to come out of them, and they're going to fight, and the older one will serve the younger one. Welcome to the Middle East right here, right? This is like where it all started. And you look at this, and she's given this prophecy. But the reality is even families that are trying to walk with the Lord and pray and do the right things, you're messed up and you fight. I so appreciated the way Kamala started out this morning as she was saying, hey, come on in, let's sing. And she said, no matter how hard it was to get here, no matter how hard it was to get here. One of the values we have at our church is authenticity. I don't do well with fake. I just don't do well with fake. If you remember last fall, some of you were here for this, some of you weren't. I got in trouble, miscommunication, just pure miscommunication. When I told people at church, that if you're coming to CTK and you want to wear a mask, that this isn't the church for you, I don't have time for you, just leave. And I was talking in context about being fake, okay? But other people were like, I didn't know he was like that strong on the mask situation, because they were still thinking COVID. But how many of you were there when I said that about, yeah. And it's just true. I don't like fake. I don't like fake. Let's just be real with each other. How many of you have ever been in a fight on your way to church, and as soon as you step in the door, put on a fake smile? Raise your hand. Oh, yeah. Okay, that happens all the time. And even for those of you that weren't raising your hand, I know you weren't raising your hand because you're afraid your spouse next to you is going to kill you if you raise your hand, right? Yeah, you look at it, and that happens all the time. Even the most godly families fight. We strive against each other. Why is it that throughout the Bible there are little things mentioned about husbands and wives, all the way from Adam and Eve, and then you get all the way into the epistles that Paul has to write as he's telling churches how to get along and how to represent Christ in their communities. And Paul has to talk about husbands and wives. This is how you get together and how you're supposed to represent Christ. It's because we fight. We struggle. There's tensions that take place. But that's not how we want to stay. And one of my hopes is as we go through Genesis, we're able to look at some of the things that cause dysfunctions, that cause fighting within families, that we're able to be open and talk about it, and maybe even laugh about it. Be like, yep, that one's us. That one's us. I don't want to fix you. I don't want to fix you. This is what I've learned. How many of you were here last Sunday? Okay, I said something last Sunday, and then this week I went to Cuts Force, and Jenna Kate, who was up here last week and graduated, she works at Cuts Force, and she's waving me over just a couple days ago. And I went over there, and I'm like, yeah, what's up? She goes, from Sunday, I just have this really important question I have to ask you. I said, yeah, what? She goes, what's it like to be almost 50? I walked in there last night to get candy for my grandsons. And she walks by and she's like, Tim, what's that right there? I'm like, do I have something in my hair? She goes, it's just white. What's happening? But that white is earned credit for dealing with family. Here's the thing. We're all messed up. But can we just be honest and talk about these things? And if we're in a section maybe where it's talking about, hey, here's a tension that happens between husbands and wives, or here's a tension that happens between parents and children, or with grandchildren and grandparents, or here's something that goes on, maybe we can be humble enough and authentic enough and trust in God's grace enough just to be able to chuckle at it a little bit and say, yep, that's me. Because I don't want to fix you. I've learned in almost 50 years, I can't even fix myself, right? All right, I'll take it. It's true, and I'll laugh at it. But you look at it, yeah, I don't want to fix you. But you know what I want to do? I want to look at Scripture as a church, as a people, and say, yeah, that is a problem. And if I have that problem, to say, I have that problem, and I don't want to continue in that. And so, can you pray for me? Can you pray for me? That's what we're trying to do as a church. To look at Scripture, to let it show us who God is, show us who we are in light of how He created us, in light of the gospel of grace, and to be transformed by it. And the best way that happens is when we're real and we're humble and we just say, hey, that one right there, that verse, that one was for me. I struggle with that. Would you pray for me? So what kind of things are in here that cause these tensions and these fights within families? Verse 27 we read, when the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man. If you have your Bible, underline that, a quiet man, dwelling in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. A couple things with this. When you read this, you have definitely two different boys with very different personalities. Esau is described in multiple ways within Genesis. He's described first as being hairy. His nickname is Edom, and we'll get to that in this next section we're going to read in a minute. And Edom means red, so because his hair was reddish too, and the stew he liked was red. So he's a red, hairy guy. And you didn't know that there were Scotsmen in the line of Abraham, but there are. And he's a red, hairy guy. And at the same time, he loves hunting and camping. Man, he's a manly man, right? And then you have Jacob described. Jacob, he likes to dwell in the tents, and he's a quiet man. Or some translations say he's a simple man. And for the life of me, I don't know why they say that. In fact, most pastors and commentators, when they talk about Jacob, they'll say he was a mama's boy. But I don't know why, because where in our translation it says he was a quiet man, there's no other place in the Bible that is translated quiet or simple. There is somebody else that word in Hebrew, tam, is used to describe over and over and over again. Where you find that word most is in two books, one in Psalms, but about another individual, it's used over and over to describe Job. And always as him being blameless, upright, complete, or perfect. That's how it's used every time it's used in Psalms. And it's used one time in Proverbs to mean the same thing. I don't know why it gets translated this way, other than the fact that for years upon years, we've been told that Esau was the manly man who liked to go out in the field, and he had lots of testosterone, so he was super hairy. But Jacob, he liked to cook, and he lived in the tents, and his mom loved him, so he was the mama's boy. He must have been simple or quiet. But that word doesn't mean that. Literally in Hebrew, it means to be a person who is full and complete, to be blameless and upright. And it's a better way to look at these two right here. Is it true that Jacob is kind of a manipulator and a schemer? Yes, he absolutely is. But remember, within the context of Genesis, Jacob is the child that the promise of Abraham goes through, not Esau. And so let's just put this in a completely different context. Maybe good on Father's Day. What is happening in this passage is this. You have, just like Ishmael was the son of the flesh, and Isaac was the son born of the Spirit, you have the same kind of thing right here. Esau is the man of the flesh, and we're going to see that in just a second. He is the guy who's all about the here and now, the excitement of the hunt and going out there doing these things. But you have Jacob, who is the one that the blessing of God is going to go through, and he is actually the one whose direction is toward the things of God. He is the one that already they're saying, like, man, the way he lives his life is complete. He lives it to the full. He's well-rounded. He is blameless, and he is upright. Now, I'm not trying to put down hunters by that, okay? By this thing. I'm not trying to do that by any way, shape, or form. What I'm trying to do is exalt Jacob the exact same way that the Hebrew words do it. Moses wrote it that way for a reason. And then that's copied with the words describing Job for a reason. It created this tension in the family, though, because these two are so different. And then you look at their parents. Isaac loved Esau because Isaac loved meat. That's what it's talking about. And you see it throughout even the next chapter and the chapter after that. Isaac. Isaac is supposed to be the one who is the line and the blessing of Abraham. But you actually see very little spirituality coming from Isaac as you read about his story. You know who's talked more about in the story than Isaac? His wife, Rebekah. And when you really compare and contrast the two, she's the one with the robust faith that's trying to serve the Lord. Isaac, in and of himself, is like, I like that son better because he likes smoked tri-tip. That's basically what you have going on here. And you have Rebekah saying, I really love Jacob. He's blameless. He's upright. You wouldn't find, we're going to find that Esau, even the women, not woman, but women he picks to marry aren't godly at all. And they create all kinds of problems for the family. You have this division taking place, though, of favoritism. And it's not good. Sometimes within families, the divisions and the fights happen because of favoritism. Moms and dads, don't play favorites. Don't play favorites. I remember with our kids, they have 2 parents and there's 3 daughters, right? 2 parents, 3 daughters. And one time as they were adults, a discussion happened where, our daughters were telling me, well, we all know that mom loves this one of us the most and you love this one of the most and that this one's just like the ugly stepchild and who had to clean all the bathrooms. I don't know. But, we got to this conversation about that, and I remember just saying to my girls, that's not true. We love you all. We love all of you just the same. I just said, one of the things you got to understand, though, is just like where you have different friends and your personalities click and connect with different people differently, that's exactly how it is in a family. That's how it is in a family. 3 daughters, I connect with them very differently, very differently. I have one daughter who's a counselor, and we connect a lot of times on talking about empathy, talking about how dysfunctional you guys are, talking about just all these different things. And when we relate on that level, we were both working on our master's degrees at the same time and able to talk about that and just the stress of it. And we relate on that level. I have another daughter, who's just, she's just smiley and bubbly and she, I relate with her because she's so smart and, I don't know. But, she's the youngest in our family, and I'm the youngest in our family, so we commiserate together and all this stuff. And it's just, we connect really good. And then I have another daughter who's like me, and she'll throw down on you guys. She's just like me. Like, she'll say it how it is and just let you know exactly how she feels. She gets that from me. We connect in different ways. And part of that is that my wife and I have been very intentional about learning how to connect with each one of our children in different ways. Moms and dads, all of your kids are very different. Learn what makes each one of them tick. Learn to spend time with them in the ways that connect with them. You might have one child that likes to go to movies. So guess what? If you want to spend time with them, don't go fishing. Take them to a movie. You might have one child that really likes sports and you like sports and you're able to connect that quick and like, hey, let's sit down, let's watch a game or let's go to a game or let's go throw a ball in the yard. And you might have another child where you like sports a lot, but they're a musician. Guess what? If you really want to connect with them, don't force them to play the sport you like. Get them lessons on that instrument. Please get them lessons on that instrument. And then go to their concerts and try to connect that way. It is on you, parents, to make those connections. You're the older, the more mature ones. Don't play favorites. Learn how to connect with your kids so that you have a relationship with them. And likewise, can I say this? A lot of adult children in here. How many of you are adult children? Yeah, that's every one of you. Give some grace to your folks. Because you may have a mom or dad that you look at and you're like, I just never really connected with them. We just clashed. Do you ever think maybe you guys just have very different personalities? And as much as they drove you crazy, you drove them crazy. Give some grace with that. I literally just had a conversation with somebody who was struggling, grieving the loss of a parent. And they said, I'm struggling with anger and guilt because with my parent, we just did not get along. And we spent time talking about the good things from this parent. I said, it's okay. If there's areas where you fought and you didn't get along, it sounds like your personalities were incredibly different. And I was like, what are you on a Myers-Briggs? And it turns out him and his mom were exact opposites, right? Just did not get along at all. But for him to be able to recognize, you know what, though? We didn't get along and our personalities didn't click, but she was a good mom and I loved her. Just set him free. Let's finish this text out really quick. Once, when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field and he was exhausted. And Esau said to Jacob, let me eat some of the red stew, for I'm exhausted. And therefore his name was called Edom, which means red. Jacob said, sell me your birthright now. And Esau said, I'm about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me? Jacob said, swear it to me now. So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew. He ate, he drank, he rose, and he went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Can I be non-pastoral for a second? What a moron. I mean, they're wealthy. They're like sheiks, okay? That's like what they are. I'm so hungry, I'm gonna die. No, you're not. You're having a full conversation, right? He's like they're debating with his brother. He's not about to die. He's just hungry. He's a man of the flesh. He just wants his flesh gratified so much that he despises the blessings of God that could have been his. He despises the blessings that his family would have given him because his flesh is fighting against his spirit. You look at this and it's amazing that he's literally willing to sell the birthright for a bowl of lentil stew? Really? It's not even Buster's barbecue. It's lentil stew. And if you notice in verse 34, just his actions. 4 verbs in rapid succession. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew. Notice this about Esau. He ate it, he drank, he rose, and he went away. 4 verbs, rapid succession. And in Hebrew, it's like a bump, 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 bump. I'm out. Didn't even sit and enjoy the stuff. And so he despised. Brothers and sisters, do not despise the way God has blessed your family. And do not despise the way your family has blessed you. There's been a lot of studies and people looking at things. It's not a popular thing for some to look at, but with a lot of the riots, a lot of the protests that have broken out over the last 3 years, we have a tendency to think that a lot of it is by people that are poor and down and out and on the outside. But do you realize that riot after riot, the people getting arrested typically are white, upper middle class people in their 20s? You catch that? They're like people that are rioting and protesting racism, protesting that law enforcement isn't fair, protesting, homelessness, protesting all this stuff, and they've never actually experienced it themselves. They come a lot of times from incredibly privileged families, not being thankful for the things that they have, but instead wanting to protest and fight and point fingers. It is so easy to gripe and complain about your family. It is so easy. You know your family better than anybody else knows your family. It is so easy while your dad is preaching to mock him and throw it. I'm just kidding. That was self-serving. Please give me gifts later. No, it's so easy. It is so easy to despise the blessings we have and to not be thankful. You know how many times I've sat down with people who have probably come from way worse family situations than you've come from. I've sat down with, we have people in our church that have really bad family histories. It wasn't too long ago, I talked with a married couple, and I knew a little bit about the husband's family, but after I heard everything, I was like in shock, and I was like, can I just say one thing? I was like, yeah. And I said, you have a really messed up family. And he just started laughing. And I'm like, I didn't know all that. Like, that's a crazy upbringing. Even he has things he can find to be thankful about. I was on a walk this week. Usually I start out my sermons with that. And I found myself kind of complaining to the Lord. And I wasn't complaining about my kids. I wasn't complaining about the church. I wasn't complaining about my wife. I was complaining because I hadn't seen an eagle in a few weeks. Oh, great, here he goes again. And the most incredible thing happened. Literally, over the last few weeks, there's been vultures all over along the Willamette and at the end of the logging road. There's like vultures all over the place. I'm like, I don't want to see you ugly vultures. You guys are bald, right? I want to see a bald eagle. It's not bald, it's just white hair, right? I want to see that. And I'm just like, I don't want to see the vultures. And literally 2 days ago, I'm down at the river. I'm looking around. There are vultures swirling everywhere around me. And I'm like, God, like, I just want to see an eagle. This isn't what I want. These are ugly. And I'm looking up, and I realize out of the 7 birds that are swirling above me, there's one that's higher than all the rest. It's way up there. And it starts dropping down lower, and I'm like, that must just be another vulture. The head's not white. It's not a bald eagle. This thing dropped down so low and flew right over me. I could see its eyeballs. I could see its beak. I could see it eyeing my puppy. And its head wasn't white, but it was salt and pepper on its stomach, and its feathers were, you know what it was? An adolescent bald eagle. It takes years for bald eagles to get the white on their head. They start out totally dark, and then little by little, they get white feathers up and down their wings and their body, and then eventually those feathers turn all dark, and their head goes white, and their tail goes white. And I'm looking up there, I thought it was vultures, and I'm griping and complaining, not realizing the one soaring above all the others is an eagle that I was watching the whole time, and it was right in front of me. Why am I saying that? Don't despise the blessings you have from your family. There might be a lot of crud in the way, and you might have to look a little bit further and dig a little bit deeper, but there are blessings that God has given you through your family. Thank Him for that. Thank your families for those things. Well, here's just a few things. Over the next several weeks, we're going to look more and more at the family. Why? Because God loves families, and families are a blessing. And I want a church full, more full, of even more awesome, more incredible families.